The transport shuttle descended through Viridia's atmosphere with a low, comforting hum, a sound far removed from the violent, rattling re-entries Joran was accustomed to from his work on Mars and the asteroid belts. Through the viewport, a world of impossible green unfolded beneath him. It was nothing like Earth, not the Earth he knew, which was a patchwork of gray biodomes and vast, tan-colored recycling farms. This was a rampant, untamed tapestry of life. Emerald forests crawled over gentle mountains, and rivers the color of liquid silver wound through valleys so lush they seemed to swallow the light. He adjusted the cuff of his corporate tissue jumpsuit, the fabric to stiff and new. He was here as a senior terraforming consultant for Astral Gen. Though the official mission brief was a laughable piece of fiction, cultural and technological exchange with the Viridian people, he knew the truth. He'd read the internal memos. Viridia was a target. Its unique, stable biosphere was a gold mine for pharmaceutical and agricultural patents. The exchange was the first, gentle step in a long process of assimilation, of convincing the Viridians to willingly hand over the keys to their world for the promise of advanced technology they didn't need. The galaxy, in this case the Astral Gen board, thought it was their clever idea. Joran was just the man to make it happen. He was met at the landing field by Kale, a Viridian liaison whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome, Mr. Joran. We hope your stay will be enlightening." The tour of the research compound was a blur of sleek, organic-looking buildings grown from living wood and polished stone. It was beautiful, but it felt like a gilded cage. The Viridians were polite, hospitable, but there was a reserve there, a quiet judgment he felt in his bones, that feeling suffocated by the corporate pleasantries. Joran slipped away from the compound that first evening. He followed a path that led away from the buildings, down into a shallow ravine where the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. The sounds of the compound faded, replaced by the chirping of unseen creatures and the gentle rustle of leaves. And that's where he saw her. She was kneeling in the soil, her back to him, her hands buried in the roots of a plant with broad, iridescent leaves. Her hair was the color of dark moss, streaked with strands of silver that caught the light of Viridia's twin moons. She was humming, a low, resonant tune that seemed to sync with the rhythm of the forest around her. "You're crushing the spine creepers," she said without turning around. Her voice was calm, melodic. Joran looked down, startled to see he was standing on a patch of delicate, fern-like plants. He quickly stepped back. "I'm sorry. I didn't see them. Most people don't," she said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were the color of the Viridian sky at twilight, a deep, gentle violet. She wore simple, practical clothes stained with soil, a stark contrast to the pristine robes of the other Viridians he'd met. "You're the Earthman, the terraformer," she said, the word not with hostility, but with a curious weight, as if it were a strange, archaic title. "Joran," he said, offering a hand. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at her own soil-covered ones, and gave a small, wry smile, showing him her palms instead. "Anya, I'm just a gardener." She gestured to the plants around her. "This is my real work, not the show gardens up at the compound." He knelt beside her, feeling the rich, black earth give way under his knees. "It's incredible, the biodiversity here. It's unlike anything in the databases." "That's because the databases only catalog what we let them see," she said simply, her fingers gently tracing the vein of a leaf. "The compound, the approved research zones, that's just the surface. The real heart of Viridia is deeper. It's quieter." For the next hour, she showed him things that defied his training. A fungus that glowed with a soft, internal light, pulsing in a slow rhythm she claimed matched the planet's magnetic field. A tree whose roots, when brushed, released a scent that cleared his mind of a headache he hadn't even realized he'd had. She spoke of the world not as a collection of resources, but as a single, vast, interconnected entity. A symphony, she called it. "Your people," she said, finally looking directly at him, her violet eyes seeming to see right through his corporate facade. "They hear the music, but they only want to isolate one note, patent it, and sell it. They don't understand that without the rest of the symphony, the note is just noise." Joran felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His mission was to identify that one note. the key biological asset that would make astral gens take over inevitable. But as he watched Enya's hands move with such reverence over the living world, as he breathed in the complex, alive air of the Viridian night, the mission brief felt hollow, a relic from a grayer, poorer universe. What if they don't care about the symphony? He asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Enya's smile was sad, but her gaze was steady. Then they will never truly have this world, no matter how many flags they plant or contracts they sign. She stood, brushing the soil from her knees. Come back tomorrow, Earthman. I'll show you the singing caves. Your databases have no record of those. As she walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, Joran remained kneeling in the rich soil. The gilded cage of the compound suddenly felt a million miles away. He was no longer just a corporate agent on a mission. He was a student, and he had just met his teacher. And for the first time in a long, long time, he was unsure of the lesson he was supposed to be learning. The days blurred into a rhythm that was entirely new to Joran. His mornings were spent in the compound, performing the expected duties of his role. He reviewed atmospheric data, ran simulations on soil compatibility, and exchanged hollow pleasantries with Kale, who watched him with the patient, unblinking focus of a predator. But his afternoons and evenings belonged to Anya. She was true to her word, leading him to the singing caves. They were not caves of stone, but vast, interconnected chambers formed by the roots of ancient, colossal trees. When the wind passed through them, it created a low, harmonic hum that vibrated in his very bones. It felt like listening to the planet breathe. Anya would sit with her eyes closed, a small, peaceful smile on her face, and Joran found himself doing the same. The corporate tensions of the morning melting away in the resonant quiet. He learned that her role as gardener was a profound understatement. She was a custodian, a tender of Viridia's most delicate and vital ecosystems. She showed him how the iridescent moss on the north side of the Crystal River purified the water, and how the seemingly aggressive thorn vines actually protected the saplings of the canopy trees from herbivores. It was a deep, intricate wisdom, passed down through generations, not stored in data slates, but in stories and songs, and the feel of the soil under one's fingers. He found himself sharing things in return, things he hadn't spoken of in years. The gritty, recycled air of his childhood sector on Mars, the relentless pressure to be useful, to be productive, to justify one's existence through work, the quiet loneliness of a life spent bending dead rock into habitable shapes. You build worlds, Anya had said, her head tilted as she considered him. But do you ever stop to listen to them? The question haunted him. He was falling in love with her. He realized with a jolt one evening as they watched the twin moons rise over the whispering plains. It was in the simple way her hand brushed his when she passed him a piece of sweet, sun-warmed fruit. It was in the light in her eyes when she explained a complex, symbiotic relationship. It was a terrifying, wonderful feeling that made his mission feel like a stain on his soul. The turning point came on a day when Kale summoned him for a progress review. The meeting was not in the main conference hall, but in a small, soundproofed chamber deep within the compound. Your reports have been curiously lacking in actionable data, Mr. Joran, Kale began, his voice smooth as oil. Our investors are growing impatient. They seek a return, a singular, defining asset. These things take time, Joran replied, keeping his voice neutral. The Viridian biosphere is complex. To isolate one component without understanding the whole is a risk we are prepared to take, Kale said, a sharp edge entering his tone. He slid a data slate across the table. It displayed a schematic Joran recognized instantly. It was a plan for a massive atmospheric processor, designed to release tailored microbes that would aggressively simplify the planetary ecosystem, making it ideal for monoculture farming of astral gens' patented grain strains. It was ecological butchery disguised as progress, this. Joran struggled for words. This would devastate the native flora and fauna. It would break the planetary cycle. It would create a stable, profitable agricultural world. Kale corrected. The planetary cycle, as you romantically call it, is inefficient. We will make it efficient. Your new task is to identify the weakest point in the current biosphere's resilience. Find the linchpin we can pull to make this transition. Swift, Joran felt sick. He left the meeting on unsteady legs, the sterile air of the corridor feeling like a poison. He didn't go to his quarters. He walked straight out of the compound and down the now familiar path to Enya's glade. He found her tending to a patch of the glowing fungi, her hands moving with their usual gentle precision. She took one look at his face and her smile faded. "Joran, what is it?" The words tumbled out of him in a rushed, hushed torrent. He told her everything. The real purpose of his mission, the atmospheric processor, Kel's demand to find the linchpin. He showed her the schematics on his own, discrete data slate. "They're not just here for a patent, Anya. They're here to rewrite your entire world, to turn it into a farm." He expected shock, anger, tears. Instead, a profound, weary sadness settled over her features. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm. "We knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "We have always known their true face. We hoped you were different. I'm supposed to give them a way to do this," he said, the shame a hot coal in his chest. "They think it's their idea to proceed, that they're forcing my hand. But I can't. Anya, I can't." He was laid bare before her, his loyalty torn in two, his professional purpose shattered. He had come to her world as a conqueror and had instead been conquered by it. By her. Anya was silent for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his. She was weighing his soul. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "Then we must make them believe they have won, while ensuring they lose." She led him deeper into the forest than they had ever gone before, to a place where the trees were so tall they blocked out the moons. In a small, hidden clearing, a single, unassuming plant grew. It had silvery, heart-shaped leaves and a stem that seemed to pulse with a soft, internal light. "This," Anya said, kneeling beside it, "is the heart root. It is the linchpin, but not in the way they think." She explained that the heart root was the nexus of a planet-wide mycorrhizal network, a biological internet that connected all plant life. It regulated growth, shared nutrients, and maintained balance. It was the conductor of the symphony. If it is harmed, the entire system becomes unstable, vulnerable to disease and collapse, she said. "This is the weakness Kale wants you to find." A cold dread washed over Joran. "Then I can't tell them." "I won't. You must," Anya said, her gaze unwavering. "But you will tell them a truth that serves our purpose. You will report that the heart root is the key to the planet's stability, which is true. But you will also report that its network is so delicate, so perfectly attuned to Viridia's unique conditions, that any attempt to introduce foreign microbes or alter the atmosphere will cause a catastrophic cascade failure. You will tell them that to attempt their simplification would be to destroy the very resources they came here to claim." Joran stared at her, understanding dawning. It was a master stroke. He would give Kale exactly what he asked for, the key to controlling the planet. But the information would be a deterrent, not a weapon. It would make the corporate plan look like financial suicide. "They'll have it vetted by their own scientists," he said, "and they will find it to be true." Anya replied, "The truth is our shield, Joran. They see the world as a machine with parts to be replaced. We see it as a living body. We are just showing them that their proposed surgery would be fatal." In that hidden clearing, surrounded by the sleeping forest, a new pact was forged. It was no longer just a growing romance between a terraformer and a gardener. It was a conspiracy, a shared secret held in the space between their clasped hands. Joran had chosen his side. He would use the corporation's own greed and arrogance against them. He would feed them the truth and let them believe it was their own cleverness that made them withdraw. The galaxy thought this was their idea. He and Anya would let them believe it. The air in Kel's office was cold and still, a stark contrast to the vibrant humidity of Enya's glade. Joran stood before the Viridian liaison's desk, a data slate held loosely in his hand. He had spent the last week meticulously building his case, weaving Enya's profound truths with his own corporate jargon, creating a tapestry of fact that led to only one inescapable conclusion. "You're certain of this?" Kel's voice was flat, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the report. "The data doesn't lie." Joran replied, his tone that of a disappointed scientist. He gestured to the schematics floating above the slate. "We've identified the nexus organism, what the locals call the heart root. It's the core of a planetary-scale symbiotic network. It's a marvel, really, but it's also the system's greatest vulnerability, he explained, using the dry, technical language of risk assessment and systems analysis. He showed how the heart root's network, so perfectly calibrated, was hypersensitive to foreign biological agents. Introducing the atmospheric processor's tailored microbes wouldn't just compete with the native life. It would trigger a defensive cascade, a biochemical warfare on a global scale that would render the entire biosphere toxic and unstable within months. In short, Joran concluded, tapping the data slate to emphasize his point. The proposed terraforming protocol would act like a targeted poison. It would destroy the very pharmaceutical and agricultural assets we're here to secure. The financial loss would be catastrophic. Viridia would become a liability, not an asset. He watched Kell's face carefully. He saw the flicker of frustration, the tightening of the jaw. It was working. He was presenting failure not as a lack of effort, but as the only logical outcome of their own aggressive plans. So your recommendation is to abandon the primary objective? Kell asked, his voice dangerously quiet. My recommendation is to reevaluate, Joran corrected, smoothly shifting to a contingency plan Anya had helped him devise. We proceed with the cultural exchange. We offer them medical technology, material science, in exchange for limited, supervised access to certain non-essential biological samples. We build trust, we learn. Perhaps in a generation, we can find a way to work with the system, not against it. It's a longer timeline, but it's the only one that doesn't end in total loss. He was giving Kell a way out, a path that allowed the liaison to save face, to report back to Astral Gen that he had averted a financial disaster. Thanks to Joran's diligent work, he was making the withdrawal look like a shrewd, strategic pivot. Kell was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the data. I will confer with the board, he said finally, dismissing Joran with a wave of his hand. As Joran left the compound, the tension in his shoulders began to ease. He found Anya not in her glade, but at the edge of the whispering plains, sitting with an older Viridian woman whose hair was the color of pure moonlight. The woman had the same deep, knowing eyes as Anya, but hers held the weight of centuries. Joran. This is Alara, Anya said softly. My mentor. Alara studied him, her gaze seeming to peel back the layers of his corporate training, his fears, his newfound resolve. So, she said, her voice like the rustle of ancient leaves, you have planted the seed of doubt. I've given them every reason to leave, Joran confirmed. Sitting beside Anya, the warmth of her arm against his was a grounding force. I've framed their own plan as a guaranteed failure. Alara nodded slowly. Good. The sharpest blade is often the truth. Wielded gently, she looked out over the plains, where the tall, silver grass swayed in hypnotic patterns. They see the universe as a thing to be conquered. They do not understand that some things can only be received as a gift. Your failure, as you call it, is a gift to them. They are just too blind to see it. Over the next few weeks, Joran played his part perfectly. He authored a series of detailed, pessimistic reports for AST. The message from Astral Gen headquarters arrived on a morning draped in a soft, pearl gray mist. Joran was summoned to Kell's office alone. The usual hum of the compound felt subdued, as if the very structure was holding its breath. Kell stood by the window, not looking at him, his posture rigid. The board has reached a decision, Kell said, his voice stripped of its usual polished tone. It was flat, final. They are terminating the Viridia initiative. Effective immediately, a quiet, profound relief washed through Joran, so potent he had to school his features into a mask of professional disappointment. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. I see. A prudent financial decision, given the risks I outlined. Kell turned, his eyes sharp, searching Joran's face for any hint of triumph. He found none. They believe the projected return does not justify the unique challenges this world presents. The instability of the biosphere, the resistance of the native population to meaningful progress. He spoke the corporate lines as if reciting a eulogy for his own career advancement. We are to cease all operations. All personnel and assets are to be withdrawn within the standard 30-day protocol. Joran allowed a carefully measured sigh. A shame. The potential was significant. Potential is meaningless without control, Cale snapped, the veneer of calm cracking for a moment. He gestured dismissively at the world beyond the window. This place is a beautiful prison. It will never be tamed. It's not worth the effort. The galaxy thought it was their idea. The words echoed in Joran's mind, a silent victory chant. They were leaving, convinced of their own shrewdness, completely unaware they had been gently guided to this very conclusion. I will begin the shutdown procedures, Joran said, his tone all business. We'll leave the infrastructure. Dismantling it would be an unnecessary cost. See that you do, Cale said, turning his back once more, a clear dismissal. And Joran, your final report. Make sure it clearly details the insurmountable obstacles. I want no ambiguity for the historical record. Of course, Joran replied. Clarity is paramount. The next 30 days were a study in orderly retreat. Joran oversaw the process with an efficiency that would have made his corporate trainers proud. Equipment was powered down and cataloged. Data was backed up and shipped. The Viridians who worked in the compound were paid their final wages with polite, impersonal courtesy. There were no speeches, no accusations, no dramatic farewells. It was a quiet, corporate funeral. Through it all, Joran and Anya maintained their distance in public, but in the hidden spaces of the forest, their private celebrations were filled with a giddy, disbelieving joy. The night the last transport ship lifted off, carrying a sour-faced Cale back to the stars, they stood together at the edge of the tree line, watching its engines fade into a pinprick of light and then into nothing. The silence that settled over Viridia was immediate and profound. It was not an empty silence, but a full one. The sound of a world exhaling a breath it had been holding for years. The compound stood empty, a silent, sleek monument to a threat that had passed. A few days later, a final, official communiqué arrived for Joran, routed through the planetary comms network. It was from Valerius, the astral gen overseer who had greenlit the mission. Joran. The message read, your service, while ultimately unable to alter the unviable nature of Viridia, has been noted. Your final reports were exceptionally clear in outlining the fundamental incompatibility of this world with our corporate objectives. You have saved the company a significant long-term investment in a lost cause. A position will be found for you upon your return. Report to the Mars Orbital Station for debriefing at your earliest convenience. Joran read the message aloud to Anya as they sat by the singing caves, the planet's gentle hum a constant accompaniment. When he finished, he looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. A lost cause. He repeated, the words tasting like freedom. Anya smiled back, her violet eyes crinkling at the corners. They saw a prison. They never understood it was a sanctuary. He took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her knuckles. Then he picked up his own data slate, the one tied to his astral gen identity. With a few swift keystrokes, he drafted his response. It was brief, polite, and utterly final. To Mr. Valerius and Astral Gen leadership, please be advised that I am terminating my employment, effective immediately. I will not be returning for debriefing. I have found a permanent position elsewhere. Regards, Joran. He set the slate down on the mossy ground. Then he reached over and with a deliberate twist, snapped the device in two. The small screen flickered and died. It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. The last tether was cut. He was no longer a terraformer, an employee, an agent of a distant corporation. He was just Joran, a man sitting beside the woman he loved on a world that had accepted him, listening to the music of a planet that was, at last, truly safe. The silent withdrawal was complete. The corporation had left, believing they had made the only logical choice, and Joran had stayed, having orchestrated the entire peaceful surrender without them ever realizing a battle had been fought and lost. A year had passed since the last corporate shuttle became a memory against the stars. The change on Viridia was not a loud or dramatic one, but a quiet, profound healing. Like a scar fading over time, the sleek, foreign compound still stood at the edge of the forest, but now it was being gently reclaimed. Viridian creepers, with their iridescent leaves, scaled the once sterile walls. and the morning chorus of flutter wings echoed in its empty halls. It was no longer a symbol of intrusion, but a relic, a lesson in the resilience of a living world. In a sun-dappled clearing a few miles inland, a new structure stood, one that grew from the land rather than being imposed upon it. Its walls were woven from living, supple branches, and its roof was a canopy of broad, waterproof leaves. This was the home Joran had built with his own hands, guided by Enya's knowledge and the quiet assistance of her people. It was a part of the forest, and the forest was a part of it. This morning, Joran stood at the wooden rail of the porch, a cup of steaming tea in his hands. He watched Anya moving among her plants, her hands, as always, tending to the earth. Her hair, still streaked with its defiant silver, was tied back with a simple cord. She wore the practical, soil-stained clothes of a gardener, her true title, and she had never looked more like a queen to him. He no longer wore the stiff corporate jumpsuit. His clothes were of soft, woven viridian fiber, comfortable and worn. The calluses on his hands were no longer from operating machinery, but from shaping wood and tending soil. The constant, low-grade anxiety of his old life, the performance reviews, the political maneuvering, the fear of failure had been replaced by a deep, abiding peace. He had not lost his skills, he had repurposed them. He used his engineering mind not to dominate a landscape, but to understand it, to work in harmony with its rhythms. Anya looked up and caught him watching her. A smile, warm and effortless, spread across her face. She walked over, the scent of sun-warmed earth and sweet pollen coming with her. "The heartroot saplings are taking well in the eastern grove," she said, leaning against the rail beside him. "The blight there is almost completely reversed." He nodded, a sense of accomplishment swelling in his chest that felt purer than any corporate bonus. Together, they had been working to heal the small, scarred places where the compound's initial testing had done minor damage, using Joran's understanding of systems and Enya's deep ecological knowledge. They were mending the tears in the planetary tapestry. "The galaxy thinks it's their idea," he said softly, repeating the phrase that had become their private mantra, a summary of their shared victory. "They're probably patting themselves on the back for cutting their losses on an unviable world." "Let them," Anya replied, her voice serene. She slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Their loss is our life, their life." The words settled over him, warm and sure. This was his life now. His days were filled with tangible, meaningful work. His evenings were spent learning the old Viridian stories from Alara, or simply listening to the singing caves with Anya, her head resting on his shoulder. He was no longer an observer, a consultant, an outsider. He was Joran, Enya's partner, a student of the forest, a guardian of Viridia. He had received one more message, months ago, routed through a neutral trader. It was from a former colleague on Mars, a brief, bewildered note. "Heard you quit. Everyone says you cracked. Went native on that rock. They're writing off the whole sector as too volatile. What are you doing out there, Joran?" He had never replied. How could he explain that he hadn't cracked, but had instead become whole? How could he describe the feeling of watching a sunrise that wasn't filtered through a dome, or the taste of fruit picked straight from a tree, or the sound of the woman he loved humming a tune that the wind seemed to echo? They would never understand. They would see only a retreat, a failure. They could not comprehend that he had won everything by letting them believe they had won. "Come on," Anya said, tugging his hand. "The ripple pods in the stream by the meadow are in bloom. They only open for an hour." He let her lead him away from their home, down a path that was now as familiar to him as the lines on his own palms. They walked through forests that breathed, across meadows that sang, under a sky that was alive with color. He was not hiding from the galaxy. He had simply found a better one. As they reached the stream and saw the delicate, blue flowers unfurling on the water's surface, shimmering with captured light, Joran put his arm around Anya, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. The corporation had a universe of stars, of profits and losses, of power and control. But here, on this one, quiet, unviable world, Joran had everything. He had a purpose, a home, and a love that was as deep and enduring as the roots of the ancient trees. The silent withdrawal had not been an end. It had been the most beautiful beginning.